Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is heading to the United Nations in New York this morning to speak before the General Assembly. Netanyahu's speech comes as international calls for ceasefires grow louder in Gaza, and the world watches to see how he frames Israel's response.
Let's bring in Dave Sussman right now, an Israeli American who lives in Israel and the host of the TV show Land of the Bible and one of Israel's most popular tour guides. Good morning to you. What are Israelis expecting to hear from Netanyahu today when he speaks before the UN?
Yeah, first of all, good morning to all of you there and happy Friday. I think there's a lot of anticipation amongst Israelis across the board. I think it's going to be a very fiery speech. I think it's going to be a speech that is filled with a lot of information, a lot of facts, and one that's taken from a position of leadership, of how do we move forward? How do we move forward post conflict with Gaza? How do we move forward as a region here in the Middle East? And how do we bring peace between us and the Palestinians?
Citizens want to hear from Netanyahu when he speaks today in light of the recent escalation in Gaza and, a lot of questions about Netanyahu's leadership?
Yeah, rephrase that question, please.
What have you heard that Israeli citizens would like to hear? What message would they like to hear delivered as they go in front of the world body where there are a lot of critics?
Right. I don't think that anything that I feel like most citizens here feel as though whatever Bibi Netanyahu says, those that have taken a strong position throughout the last decades. We're not talking about, our traditional allies. We're not talking about England and Germany and France and the Western countries, which, there have been a few of them that have recognized, Palestine as an equal amongst the nations, as a state amongst themselves. But I don't think that there's much hope in that something that our prime minister is going to say that's going to change public opinion. It hasn't worked for decades. I hope that I'm wrong, but I think that unfortunately, the narrative has been taken over about a Palestinian state rather than how do we put an end to this war in Gaza? How do we get rid of Hamas? How do we get rid of this terrorist regime that terrorizes their own people? How do we bring freedom to Gaza? How do we, secure the borders here in Israel and broaden the Abraham Accords? I think the idea of a Palestinian state right now is so far removed from your average Israeli that most of us are like, why is this even the subject that is being discussed right now? I mean, they have had the Palestinian Authority, which is the first time there's ever been an autonomous government run by Arabs here in the land of Israel ever throughout all of history. There's never been a self-government for the Arab people here in the land of Israel. They've had that since 1994. And what have they done? They haven't built, proper schools and hospitals and roads and an infrastructure and a government and, been able to stop the flood of terrorism coming into Israel. In fact, even when Yasser Arafat was the president of the Palestinian Authority, he's the one that promoted, that supplied, that funded the second Intifada from 2000 until 2004, killing over 1,000 Israelis. And now with Hamas in Gaza for 18 years, they've ruled there. And what have they done? They've done nothing but dig terror tunnels and attack Israelis on a constant basis. So I think before even approaching a Palestinian state or government, one needs to say, okay, how do we stabilize the Arabs that are living in Judea and Samaria and Gaza? And how do we put a government that's going to have some transparency?
Sure. I don't mean to cut you off, but we want to get to another question, which is international pressure, statements made by countries in the EU. How does that impact Netanyahu's position and what you expect him to say?
I feel like Bibi Netanyahu right now is not thinking about his political future, which is unheard of really here in Israel. I mean, Bibi Netanyahu has been the longer tenured prime minister in the history of Israel. There are a lot of us who support him and his efforts during this war, like myself, that would prefer to have another prime minister. But it doesn't mean that we're so violently against him either. The reason why there are many of us who are like, hey, Bibi Netanyahu, it's time to pass the torch to the next leader. Let somebody else lead Israel now into our glorious future that is in front of us. However, he now, I think, is saying, hey, you know what? After this war is over, I'm ready, to sail off into the sunset and pass that torch. So I think he's going to come from a position of like, this is absurd that people are talking about a Palestinian state, and I think it's crazy that our Western allies like England and France and Germany have stated that they want to recognize a Palestinian state. I mean, other countries like Ireland and Portugal. I mean, it's almost it's not going to make an impact on your average Israeli, most of the countries that are stating this. However, obviously we want to have good relations with all the nations of the world. It's something that we definitely look to foster, but I think really Bibi Netanyahu is just going to come there and lay down the facts and say, why in the world, after everything that we've just seen for the last 30 years, never mind the last 2 years, the last 30 years, 18 years of Hamas, 30 years, or even more, 30 years, 31 years of the Palestinian Authority. What have they proven? How have they shown us that they can govern a nation and to give them statehood and allow them to import weapons and to build up a militia and to open their borders to whatever jihadists they want to open up? I mean, that's an absurd request. So I think most of the people that are making policies understand that, and they're not going to do that.
David Sussman, thank you. Appreciate that.
One thing, if I
thank
could
you,
just,
David.
if I could just, all right. Can I throw in one more point?
Make it really quick, please.
Very quick. All I want to say is that, the nations that said we're going to recognize a Palestinian state, they haven't said, okay, we're going to put this policy in place and this policy and this policy in place. So as of now, it's just, putting it out there. And I think it is to apply pressure.
Got it. David Sussman, thank you.
All right.
Look, context
All
for
right.
both of these world leaders, Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu, very controversial in their own countries, both with the identical approval rating of 41%. So it is not as though he is hugely popular and everything he's saying is widely accepted there in Israel. Right. It is much like what we're facing right now with division in the country over leadership. A day earlier, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas told the UN General Assembly he is ready to work with President Trump and other world leaders on a new peace plan for Israel and Palestine. Abbas calls on Hamas to disarm, urging countries to recognize Palestine. France, the UK, and other nations have done so just this week. Transitional administration after ceasefire would include Hamas. Israel considers Hamas a terrorist group and would likely reject any deal involving